Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 281, the Holy Week edition. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm Gavin Ashenden. It's Monday, the 10th of April, 2017.
Okay, Gavin and I are here to give you some news. We're going to do some Mother Church news. I read recently about some trouble with cathedrals, and I said, I got to talk to Gavin. This is making the papers. The churches don't have money anymore. Their pews are becoming more and more empty. And I'm like, well, Gavin's going to help me discuss this. Is this a state church issue? Is this a society issue? Is this a secular state versus a Christian church issue? Or is this just, we build these big buildings and we never thought we'd have to keep them maintained? You read the papers. What's going on?
Well, I think it's the equivalent of global warming. The ice packs are melting fast, and they give an indication that behind the melt lies something really rather more substantial. So in the last year or so, a number of cathedrals have reported frightening financial situations. There's a very dramatic and aesthetically unappealing cathedral in Guildford, which is southwest London. It's built on a hill of red brick. It looks like a factory from the outside.
It does.
People who love it say it's nicer on the inside, and it is. But it developed an asbestos problem in its ceiling, and the danger is that it might simply go broke. The cathedral authorities tried to sell a piece of land which would have allowed them to recuperate quite a lot of money, but they've been refused planning permission. So suddenly, for the first time, there's the prospect of the mother church of a diocese being sold off because it can't be afforded. If this was one cathedral, then it would be an embarrassment.
And that's what I was seeing. A lot of deans have ideas of how to raise money, but they can never get it passed by the bishop or by the local councils as how to raise income.
Well, huge sums of monies are required, and of course they're not raised by the local congregations who go to the cathedral. We're told, by the way, to be scrupulously fair, that the numbers of people going to cathedral worship are up, and that's a good thing, but it's an infinitesimally small percentage that's up, and certainly one that isn't going to solve the problem. The difficulty is that some cathedrals are well endowed and they're in good shape. Somebody who knows what they're talking about told me that about 30% of the cathedrals today are in financial trouble. In 5 years' time, another 30% will be in financial trouble, and 30% are probably quite safe because they have historic revenues. But what this means, of course, is that the Church of England is beginning to experience the weight of infrastructure that it can't bear. It doesn't have the people, it doesn't have the money. It's the beginning of a collapse, and it's a really rather serious situation.
Okay, well, we know the symptom of the situation. What's causing this type of situation where we have empty churches and decay over the years? I mean, we didn't just wake up one day in 2015 and say, we need a new roof, or the gutters are bad, or the foundation's crumbling. This has happened over time.
I remember one of the advantages of working in a university was that one could look along the cultural curve. So something happening in a university is 20 years ahead of what happens in secular culture. Mm-hmm. And I remember being astonished when I realized that the number of Muslims who went to prayers far exceeded the number of Christians who said their prayers. And I asked myself, is it possible that this will be replicated in wider society shortly? And the answer is, it really is. So what's taking place? I'm sorry, my clock is going to chime.
Oh, it's fine. Don't. No. Now everybody's going to know that we're recording at 4 p.m. In England.
Yes, ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Or
That's right.
Tolls for the church. All my clocks are going on. Sorry.
No, we'll continue on.
So there are a number of factors, but essentially what's taking place is the de-Christianization of England and Europe, and the Islamification of England and Europe. So you may have read a report that talked about 500 new mosques being opened in London and 500 churches being closed. We have to face the fact that Christianity is dying, Islam is growing. If we ask why Christianity is dying, there are a number of causes. One simple cause is, of course, that if you don't preach and live the gospel, Christianity won't attract people. And one of the problems in the Church of England is we fail to do that.
Okay, so church is failing, Christian church is failing. Why is Islam succeeding?
It's partly succeeding for reasons of immigration. The birth rate amongst indigenous people, Europeans, is between 1.3 and 1.7, which in some countries is not even sustainable. Amongst Muslims, it's enormously higher, partly helped by the fact that legally or pragmatically, Muslims have more than one wife, and they certainly have larger numbers of children. Certainly in Europe, what's happening is that although the basic populations aren't changing in terms of proportion, there are nonetheless large Muslim enclaves in cities. So cities are becoming quite quickly Islamic. I think I've told you before, but I remember being shocked at a interfaith conference when a Muslim friend of mine said he wasn't going to give a paper because he was entirely confident he didn't need to engage in interreligious dialogue, since many of the cities in England would be Islamic during the time of his children or his grandchildren. Demographically, he's exactly right. London has a Muslim mayor. It had a large Muslim population. There's a terrifying novel by a man called Michel Houellebecq in France, who writes, it's called Submission, where of course it's about Islam, and he writes about the French elections after next, and he portrays a picture which is the one that presently is, where Marine Le Pen, who's the National Front popular right-wing candidate, looks like she might be elected. And so to stop that happening, the left wing strike a political allegiance with the Islamic Party. There are about 10 million Muslim voters in France, so that's really quite a large number of votes if you can put them in the bag. Striking that bargain, they defeat Marine Le Pen and they hand over all education to Islam in France. It's a very compelling novel. It's only one election away. It could even happen. So what's happening in England is part of a wider demographic issue, but we are faced with the fact that Christianity is dying out rather fast, and Islam is growing rapidly. Okay, well, it's time to talk about Passover then. Yesterday, a place where you and I both been. I've been to St. Mark's in Alexandria. I have a great Egypt story one day I'll tell everybody, but I was in Cairo and Alexandria and got to visit these places in 2009 in February when I was there for the Primates meeting. You were recently over there for a sabbatical. Yes, it was actually a pilgrimage with a marvelous ecumenical group called True Life in God. And I stood in St. Marks Cathedral. Well, the story really is, when I looked at the photographs yesterday of this blown up building, I thought, goodness me, that looks familiar. Oh yes, I was standing there about a year ago. The bomb went off somewhere near this wonderful list of Alexandrian patriarchs. Not all our listeners will know that there's an unbroken list of archbishops and patriarchs going back to St. Mark. Yeah, all the way to St. Mark, they have the documented chain. Yeah. Amazing. So Mark got a nail in his shoe. He found a cobbler. He told him about Jesus. The cobbler fixed his shoe. So Mark's fixed the cobbler's soul. The cobbler became his first convert and the second patriarch. It's the most amazing place. The fact that they should have been celebrating their prayers with a suicide bomber in there who then killed so many of them and blew up the building is the most terrible outrage. And all one can do is weep. Involved in a conflict between good and evil, between people being saved and people being lost. It's a terrible microcosm of a spiritual dynamic. Well, you and I both have many friends who are Muslim, Islamic even, and
there's a coming change in this world, and they're willing to talk about it. They're willing to discuss, the differences between Christianity and Islam, and the differences. Well, I never get anybody who's willing to talk about their differences between Jesus and Muhammad, but they're willing to talk about the differences between religion. Is there a way forward by a compare and contrast between Jesus and Muhammad?
It's certainly true that trying to compare two religions is a very complicated business, particularly when there's quite a lot of fake news around. Mm-hmm. So the way in which the people were taught about the Crusades, for example, was fake news. I'm just astonished, even at this level, at this time in my life, when I look back to what my history teachers taught me, that they taught me so much rubbish that wasn't true, which is, of course, filtered through into the general consciousness. But the moment you begin to compare two very complex monolithic religions, it's very easy to get lost. Actually, all you really need to do, if you're brave enough, is to compare the life and the teaching of Jesus and the life and the teaching of Muhammad. Mm-hmm. But people don't like to do it because it's so stark. I went into a Radio 4 broadcast of the BBC about a month ago, and I thought, well, I might try this and see what happens. We were going to talk for an hour, and they were going to reduce it to 20 minutes. But at one point, I was in conversation with a New Age pastor and a Muslim imam. And at one point, I said, "Well, let's talk about Jesus and Muhammad." So Jesus meets people with hand problems, and he heals them. Muhammad meets people with hand issues, and he has them cut off. Jesus meets people who are dead, and he raises them to the life. Muhammad meets people who are alive, and he kills them. Jesus meets people who are caught in adultery and about to be stoned, and he forgives them and turns them onto a new path. Muhammad meets people in adultery, and he has them put to death then, and his followers are doing it now. Now, in one sense, this is very superficial and polemic. But in another sense, it's exactly the case. We're describing like with like. However, you won't be surprised to hear it was removed from the broadcast.
Did it make the air? I'm astonished.
I thought I'd try it, if only to test it. If only Christians would be able to say in the public space, look, we are following Jesus. He did these things and taught these things. You are following Muhammad. He did these things. He taught these things. There might be some greater clarity. But of course, there isn't a single solution. It is, however, very important that Christians wake up to the fact that Islam does not tolerate a multi-religious society or a.
That's not the BBC trying to track you down there.
My daughter. I just sent her a text. I'm busy. Whatever you do, don't phone now. I guess the text didn't get through.
I won't text.
Yes, exactly. I'm just looking for a title of the book. I remember hearing some time ago how Islam, Christianity, and Judaism got on in Spain, and there's this really very useful book called the Myth of the Andalusian Paradise, which looks at one of those places where Islam, Christianity, and Judaism inhabited the same space. I got halfway through reading it, and the violence sickened me so much I had to stop. And yet, amongst progressive intellectuals and politicians, this convivencia, this myth of living together, is still held up as possible. The fact is, Islam is really quite ruthless in its ambitions, and Christians are sleepwalking into giving away their inheritance. It's time the church woke up.
It is. We have come a long way. I don't know if you remember years ago, I think this is mid-'80s, somebody had written a book called Satanic Verses. And he had a caliphate proclaimed against him and was told, you better hide or you'll never see tomorrow. There is a little bit more proclamation or complaining about Islam or critiquing of Islam without journalists like you and me ending up at the other end of a Muslim imam's teaching.
Well, yes, that's true. Although on one occasion when I was still a chaplain to the Queen, I was phoned and asked not to go because they said there was a death threat against me. The death threat died down. I did go, and I'm still here. But the difficulty about critiquing Islam in Britain today is that they've begun to pass laws against it, so that it becomes a hate crime. You are guilty of stirring up hatred in other people because you've criticized them, but you are the criminal. So we're actually at a point when it's becoming very difficult to have public conversations about the different merits of Christianity and Islam. The cultural situation is becoming more problematic by the year.
I'm trying not to scream in my head. You're telling me a country, England, with a state church, Christian, has laws protecting Islam and not Christianity.
Yes,
I got that right?
Yes, a month ago, a very important case took place in Bristol, where some street preachers, one of whom I think was American, read out from the Bible. Now, street preachers nowadays know they have to be very careful. They wear cameras, record themselves, and at this particular point, they were reading from the Bible. The police deemed it a public order offence. They were arrested, and they were convicted. Now, of course, it's more complicated. The crowd was worked up and was provoking them, and knew perfectly well that it could get some sport with them if they called the police. So it was a kind of trap. But nonetheless, at the simplest level, they were reading from the Bible. This caused a public order offence. They were arrested. They were found guilty. This is an extraordinary place to come to in my lifetime. I'm still trying to process the implications of it.
Well, England has become modern day Rome. Good to hear.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yes.
That's how good a state church has come. I got like 2 minutes here. I've been told many times the future of the church will only exist if there's a separation from the government. The state church model has to be done away with. Is that possible?
I think legally it's not possible. The intricate relationship between state and church is so complex, and we don't have a written constitution. It would be like trying to untangle a very, very large bowl of spaghetti, and it would take too long and be too difficult. I think what's happening is that part of the state church is capitulating to the state and effectively doing a kind of a state version of Christianity, which is of course not Christianity at all. Those who want to hold the Orthodox faith will separate in practice. So there will be a separation of church and state, but it will be by people leaving the state church or slowly withdraw from it. I think that's one of the implications that that Lambeth and the House of Bishops really haven't taken on board. I'm expecting to see a number of people do something similar to the position that I found myself in, and say these circumstances. It's not possible to stay here and keep one's integrity before the Lord, and therefore either the church must change or I must leave. I think we'll find more people thinking that they must leave.
Okay, there's an update to the story we did 2 weeks ago about bishops. We talked about Jeffrey John. He was up for a bishopship. That's no longer the case. They chose another bishop. Correct?
So no, these are two stories which you've carefully interlaced together.
Of course. Why make it simple? It's Monday. I've not finished my coffee. You're probably on your third tea already.
You're just trying to make me look like I'm an expert. It's very generous of you. So Philip North was appointed Bishop of Sheffield. He withdrew because he held to the traditional belief about the orders of the church, and he's been replaced by the Dean of Liverpool, called Dr. Pete Wilcox, who's a passionate supporter of the ordination of women. Geoffrey John was considered for a bishopric of Llandaff, and somebody broke the confidentiality of the appointments procedure and told Geoffrey that he was a victim of homophobia. Anyone who knows what was us at this point, because a more homophiliac church you couldn't find. They're very friendly indeed.
Yes.
To the gay agenda. The awful truth is, it maybe they didn't choose Geoffrey John because actually they thought he might not be the best bishop for them. This is something that
yeah, I heard he was too old. So the people I talked to said, yeah, he's on the other side of almost retiring.
Well, the fact is, we really don't know what they said or thought. So, and the worst issue of this is not perhaps Jeffrey John's frustration, which he's made clear in public pronouncements, but the fact that confidentialities are broken, really amongst Christians. If you make a promise of keeping counsel, you ought to be able to rely on those promises being kept. It's something of a sadness that they weren't kept.
Gavin, I want to thank you again for your time. It's been a wonderful Monday afternoon for you and morning for me. I'll catch you next week. God bless.
God bless. Happy Easter when it comes.
Thank you.